Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. Today we're going to do something a little bit different, right? And we're going to do something that you would probably not have expected an instructor to kind of show you how to do. But in 2024, it would be foolish of me, especially in a class called Web Development Tools, to not consider the tool that is sort of the biggest thing in the world right now that is really pushing forward programming and development. Understanding how to program and understanding how to develop websites is still super important, right? You have to understand kind of how things work and how things interact with one another and how you can be able to implement something. But knowing how to code every single thing is becoming less and less important thanks to AI. Right? So we're going to talk about AI for a little bit today. We're going to talk about the things that I'm going to be expecting from you if you use AI in your projects in class. I basically want to know 3 things. And then we'll do a demonstration that I've done before. I usually do when I teach jQuery, and that's a to-do list application. But we're going to do it with ChatGPT, just so we can see how much quicker our development is when we use something like that, right? And if we relate it back to the kind of the stuff that we were talking about last week, and we were talking about, kind of the deprecation of jQuery as a language that new things are being developed in, but still in a lot of old legacy websites, that we would really need to know what's going on there in order for us to be able to do our jobs as web developers. Well, I mean, that would be a great use case for using something like, AI, an LLM, in order for us to be able to do. And to try to do everything today, I'm going to try to be able to do everything in the free and open ChatGPT. So that is at chat.openai.com. And so I'm going to do it right here in a incognito window, just so I can kind of show you the same sorts of things that you would have access to if you didn't want to create an account and or didn't want to pay for it, right? This is what you can, everything that you can do that I'm going to do today, you can do for free without an account, which is super cool. Now, before we do that, I do want to talk just a little bit about what AI is and all that kind of stuff, kind of how we can look at AI, what our expectations are there. So talking about AI just as a tool itself. So when we're looking at AI in 2024, one of the big things that we're considering, or the things that we're seeing, right, is machine learning through what we call an LLM, or a large language model. And that's basically just a super big data set, right? Like machine learning and artificial intelligence is not anything new. What is new is kind of the models that we're using to do it, right? Like machine vision has been doing machine learning for decades now, right? Like I have like one of the cool examples that you see, like at potato farms. You can look them up on YouTube and watch videos of them. One of the interesting things that they kind of do there is that they will have cameras on the lines of potatoes going down a conveyor belt, and if it spots something that doesn't fit its learning model of what a potato looks like, say a rock or some sort of dirt clump or some sort of debris that was picked up in the field that wasn't a potato, it fires off a little arm and kicks that out of the line. Right? And so stuff like that's kind of existed for a long time. And now we're, moving into an era of LLMs, or large language models, and it's basically based around the same principles. Just that data set that everything is being trained on is much, much different, right? And so when we think about AI in that sort of way, essentially what we're thinking about is what our computer is best at. And that's basically pattern recognition, right? Like our computer's really good at pattern recognition. And the more patterns we show it, the better it can get at pattern recognition. So when we think about an example of our potato farm and what our AI knows about potatoes that are going down the line that it's seeing with its camera, is it doesn't know what a potato is, right? Like it doesn't know really anything about a potato, but it does know that as things are passing the camera, there is a sequence of binary that comes by that it's been told shares a similar pattern with a sequence of binary that it's been given that somebody said that it was a potato, right? Here's this series of binary, that's a potato. Here's this series of binary, that's a potato. Here's this series of binary, that's a potato. And so when I see these patterns come through my camera, I can make quick judgments. Does that fit the patterns that I know of that are potatoes within a certain tolerance, right? And if not, we kick it out. Right, so now we're just looking at words in the English language for our LLMs, for things like ChatGPT, right? Like we're still talking about patterns. We're just talking about patterns of words. And I know that if I'm an LLM, I have a certain pattern of words. And that certain pattern of words is related to this other certain pattern of words. And so if I'm my computer and I see this certain pattern that relates to this certain pattern, that means I can take these other things that I know and put them in a similar pattern and feed it back out. Right? So, it is kind of thinking the way that humans think in general, right? Like that's kind of what Alan Turing postulated when he was considering artificial intelligence way back in the 1950s. Is the idea that basically if we're talking about machine learning, we're talking about machines being able to learn like human beings. And really, even when we're talking about the pattern recognition stuff, we're kind of talking about that, right? Like when you are learning things as a human being, you basically do one of two things, right? You adjust your worldview to accommodate this new information, or you just kind of accept it in and you adapt, right? So you're either adapting or you're adopting, basically, right? Like you're taking and changing what you already know to fit a new pattern, or you're taking this into your full body of knowledge of things that you know, right? And that's essentially what our computers are doing when we're showing them more patterns and when we're providing feedback to our computers as we're just, as they're discussing kind of these AI properties, right? And all that sort of fun stuff. One of the things that Alan Turing said here that I think, is really poignant when we kind of put it in context, right, is the idea that he said, I believe that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted. And that was in 1950. Seems like he was about maybe, a decade late, a decade early on that. Because I think much of general society still kind of saw that as a pipe dream at 24 years ago. But pretty spot on, if you ask me, and from the perspective of somebody in 1950 whose concept of a computer is that it's massive. He uses these big vacuum tubes to do calculations. It takes up a whole room. Super power intensive. Right? To have that context of what a computer is and have this forethought is kind of phenomenal, right? So, as we're discussing what AI is, we want to discuss what AI isn't. It's not personal. It's not empathetic. It's not guaranteed accurate. It's not a substitute. But it is good at recognizing patterns, right? Which makes it pretty good at programming. That's one of the things is like, I'm not going to be naive and tell you that I don't think that that AI is a good programmer. All right, because at the end of the day, like programming is largely just patterns that are implemented in a certain way. I mean, that's basically what algorithms are, right? So if we take the idea of artificial intelligence and talk about pattern recognition, and then we in turn talk about algorithms and how algorithms work and kind of fit the basis, right? For those of you who have taken those classes with me before, I kind of say that an algorithm is basically just the steps that you use to do a certain thing. What's that but a pattern, right? So it's going to be pretty good at it. It's not going to always be 100% right. I've experimented with using AI in some projects to kind of augment what I know or help move things a little bit faster. And some things it misses, sometimes it misses stuff, right? Sometimes, part of the pattern gets left out. And so I have to know enough to kind of be able to identify what the issue is, to at the very least be able to ask the right question to get it to fix itself. Right? So it's not going to be right. It's not going to be a complete substitute. You know, I prefer to say that it is a supplement, a complement, not a replacement. Right? At least for now, especially when we come to the idea of programming. Right? And then when we get on the other side of it and we look at the idea of, you know, being personal and being empathetic, you know, this kind of relates to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in the design class, right? Like it's, you know, there are certain principles of design that it can probably pull from its knowledge base where it has some understanding of patterns, but in terms of actually being able to create a human-centered design that would meet an individual's needs perfectly is probably something that it's going to struggle with a little bit, because it really doesn't have that human element. It doesn't have that empathy for the user that you would want to see out of a good UX design. But again, Alan Turing, good quote here says that if a machine is meant, or if a machine is expected to be infallible, it cannot also be intelligent, right? Because intelligence implies the ability to think, and the ability to think simply implies the ability to be wrong. Right? If it's infallible, it's hard-coded, it's doing the same things over and over again, it's not thinking, it's just following standard code like it normally does. So if it's expecting, you know, if we're expecting it to be intelligent, if we're saying this is artificial intelligence, we're in turn expecting it to think, which means we have to kind of prepare ourselves for the inevitability that it can be wrong. So, you know, arming ourselves a little bit, you know, even with some of the most basic of knowledge, you know, like the things that we were discussing last week, is going to help us out a lot. The last slide that I want to look at here is just about crafting the perfect prompt. And these are just some good strategies to get AI to kind of give you the best prompt or give you the best output, right? You know, one of the things that we say is garbage in, garbage out. So, you know, if your prompt that you're entering in is bad, then your output's probably going to be bad. So I have 4 questions generally that I will ask AI, or I will ask myself as I'm writing a prompt, and that's: who do I want AI to be? What do I want AI to do? How do I want AI to act? And why do I want this information? So who do I want AI to be? You know, in our case, where we're writing code, I want AI to be a developer. What do I want AI to do? I want him to write me some code. I want him to be a developer, and I want to write me some code. I want him to follow a certain set of parameters. That's how I want him to act. So I want him to use jQuery and develop a certain set of deliverables that I'm going to give him. And why do I want this information? You know, is it something that I'm needing for myself? Is it something that I'm working on for other people? Believe it or not, having some context with how the code is going to be used actually helps get better code from time to time. So let's just jump over to ChatGPT now and do a quick little example here before we do our big example. One of the things that I might want to do is to just get it to generate really quickly for me a hello world that it puts in H1 tags on a website in jQuery. So I can simply type in, you're a web developer specializing in jQuery. I want to show a really simple example of jQuery development to my students. Could you write some code in jQuery that will display the word hello world in as a heading level 1, as a cyan heading in color, heading level 1 on a website. Right? And so, like, I know how to do that, right? Like, if we were to pull up a notepad here, we could start to write some of the code like we were writing last week, right? We would know to write our document ready. So we would go document dot ready. Function. Right, and inside of here, we would want to add our H1. So we would want to append, like an H1 tag to our body. So we would want to do something like, let's see here, something like $ body dot HTML H1 style equals color cyan hello world \H1 and close that up. Something like that, right? And if we were to pull up a little quick website here, let's just generate something. And I haven't created a folder yet for this project, so let's do that really quickly. Let's find on my other monitor here looking for Web 140 Fall 24. So I can put this jQuery 2 folder in it. So we can open it over here. File, folder. Web 140, Fall 24, jQuery 2, select folder. Yes, I trust the authors. We'll make our index.html. We'll use our image to do a quick HTML skeleton. We'll do jQuery part 2 here. We'll need to visit jQuery.com. So we can get the API or get the CDN file, I should say. So we will copy the minified version of that, just like we did last week. Come back here, paste it in the head. Add our script. We'll call it script.js. Remember, we need that script there so it knows what we were talking about when we wrote jQuery. And we'll put the reference to our script at the end of our body. So script src equals script.js /script. And we'll take that from our notepad And we'll just copy and paste that in there. Right? We can save that there. And if we did everything right, we should be able to open our live server and see our results. So it's opening over here on our other monitor. So let's pull that in. And there it is, right? We did it. We wrote exactly what we needed to write. We wrote something correct, which is kind of easy to do, right? If you know jQuery, as we did here in our demonstration. But if you don't really know it very well, or you're just learning it for the first time, or you're encountering a website where you already have something, then it might be a little tough. Let's see what ChatGPT would tell us when we ask it the same question. And we can see it does this a little bit differently, right? And it actually does it in a better way. Because what it's doing here is it's actually adding a container and it's appending this H1 to the container. So one of the things that we're going to want to note here, right, that are super important things for us to consider as we are, doing this, is it does take a little bit of understanding of just essentially how code works for me to be able to read this and tell what's going on, right? Because, but based on what we discussed last week, I can kind of understand that. Because I see my document.ready function here, right? We said that we need that to kind of let my computer know whenever the document's ready, this is what you're going to do. I see this hashtag container here. I know that applies to an ID. So I can look in the body of my HTML here, see that it has a div there with an ID of container. And we can see here that it uses a .append function to add the code in there. And so really the HTML function that I used for my demo here would also work, right? Because like basically the exact same thing that was done here was done here. It just did it using append versus HTML. And the difference between those two functions are just essentially the where it puts the item in the DOM. Right, so we could kind of look at this. Also, since we kind of set this up a little bit differently and we have all of our JavaScript in an external file, like that's a bit of best practice for us. So if we were to try to implement this, we would need to know kind of how we should implement it in our way that we're doing it in the separate file. Another thing to kind of point out here is the CDN that ChatGPT is using. It's using 3.6.0, but we're using the most current one, which is 3.7.1. So we can see that the older version of the jQuery CDN is being used there. But if we were going to implement this code, we would put our div ID equals container in the body of our HTML. Right. Another thing to kind of mention here is that we probably shouldn't be using a div here because, we want it to be W3C compliant. This is Web 115 stuff. We want to use our HTML5 tag. So I would probably want that to be like a main or a section or something like that. Right, but then in my script here, I will comment out this code that I wrote and add in the code that ChatGPT wrote. By simply copying it, pasting it, and we'll see what differences we see, if any, based on that. And here we see an issue, right? Because it's not working. So that goes back to what I talked about just a few minutes ago, right? Is like, it's all well and good, but if our machines are expected to think, then they're expected to be wrong sometimes. And I think it's actually implemented the append function incorrectly, right? If we do a little bit of inspect element here, and we look at our console, we're not seeing any issues here. Maybe I just want to double check to make sure that, yeah, you know what, that's what I did. This was actually a me error, so if I save this, it's going to start to work. And once I do that, it does. It gives me the hello world. I forgot to save the HTML file. Now, we can also see from our code that it implemented the style in a CSS tag, in style tags here. Whereas in my demo, I did the styling in the code. Another option that we could do here is I could put, since CSS or since jQuery chains, I could add .css and add color, comma, cyan here. That's another option that we could do. Right, when I do that, we see that's my hello world. And so that's one of the cool things about CSS that we kind of talked about a little bit last week, but we didn't really say much about, is the idea that it kind of, you're allowed to kind of chain function calls on one another. So I'm basically saying on the container ID, append this code, append this h1, and then on what you appended, add this CSS. And remember, one of the things that we also talked about last week was doing multiple rules there. So I could add my curly braces and do color, colon, cyan, comma, font dash family, sans serif, right? Something like that. And so now I have hello world with it augmented to with it cyan and serif. Right? So this was a combination of myself, right, as a developer who understands how to implement things and who understands how to write a little bit of jQuery with the power of ChatGPT. I moved a lot faster, right? I didn't really have to sit here and think about it. It did things a little bit differently, which probably is a little bit better in terms of memory management than the way that I just kind of pulled off the top of my head. Right? They both had similar outcomes, but pretty easy stuff. So now I'm going to do a complex example. Right? So I'm going to create another folder in this project, and I'm going to call this folder to do. Inside of this folder, I'm going to put an index file. So that means that when I link to this file, I just have to link to the folder and it'll load the file, right? So if I go to here, go to the root index, I can just go to the bottom here below this container and add an ahref equals ./to-do list application. And so now we have this to-do list application here. And if we click it, it'll take us to our empty page at /to-do, right? So we're doing all of this in this to-do list folder, which means we are going to make another script.js file for that. Right, so now instead of the root index, I'm going to be working on the to-do list index. Whole new site. And so this is going to be a to-do list. And let's put a little emoji here in our title, right? So let's do that. All right, so now I'm going to head back to my friend ChatGPT here, and I'm just going to let him program it. We're just going to do exactly what ChatGPT says. And include that in the application. And this is an application that I would do manually as a part of this, right? Like I have the code that I would do for this same application because I usually do this application when I'm teaching jQuery. But when I do it, it takes me the whole hour. I don't talk about anything else. I just go through the entire project that way, making the to-do list application. And that's all that I have time for in the live session, right? At this point, I've discussed AI a little bit. I've done a small example. It's now 4:33 on the clock that's right here beside me. So I want to see how quick it goes for me to just give ChatGPT some instructions here and just kind of let it do its thing. This might be super quick, like we might be done with this in like 3 minutes. Or it might take some canoodling and fadoodling to try to get it to work. Right, so that's just what we're going to do here. And I'm going to refresh this page just so it starts me with a blank slate. And I'm going to give it some context. I'm having some trouble keeping up with my to-do list for the day. Can you help me build, let's say, be my web developer? Can you build a to-do list application in jQuery for me that meets the following specification? Now I'm going to hit Shift. I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard and hit Enter so it enters to a new line. I'm going to say like 1, allow me to type in to-do list items. Allow me to give them an importance, high, medium, low. Allow me to mark them off when they're done. Don't remove them, just mark through them and make them a lighter color. Store everything in local storage in case I accidentally refresh the page. I can keep my list. And he goes to town spitting it out. So there's our HTML here for the project. I'm going to forego using their script. I'm going to put it in there, but I'm going to replace it with 3.7.1. So let's just, I want to keep to-do list in there as well. So let me just take, let me just take everything from the body down and replace that. And I'm going to use the to-do list link for the most, or the CDN link for the most current version of jQuery here. We'll slap that in the header. We'll add a link to our style sheet here. So we'll say style href equals style.css /style. All right. So we'll go ahead and save this. We'll need to add ourselves a style.css file to our to-do list. Style.css. Now let's copy that CSS file in there. We're going to copy that CSS into my CSS file. We'll save that. And finally, we'll copy the script file. We'll copy that code into my jQuery. And this does look somewhat similar to what I do, right? Like this function here pulls data back from local storage. This sends it to local storage. This adds the important, and it does it. That's interesting, is that it does it with a an argument, a custom argument in there, which is pretty cool. Here's what we do to mark it completed. It actually toggles a class, so it changes the CSS class that's being applied to the list item when it's completed. It's pretty cool. So let's see what it looks like. Right? We have our application here. We know that if we click this link here, it should take us to our application. So let's see what it does. We go. Okay, we see we have a to-do list here. And we see that if we right-click and inspect element, this will tell us if there's any problems up front. And there's not. I do have a little error here, but it's not because of this. It's because of it's because of a plugin I have installed. So we see there's not any errors. Let's try something. Let's try code. Let's add a to-do list of code a website here. And let's make that medium priority. Add that task. See what happens. And we see, okay, it's telling us that, we're going to code a website. Now, what's not easy to see here is how we mark that as completed. Right? There's nothing really here that does that. So let's ask ChatGPT. And let's say when I'm using the website, how do I mark a list item as completed? It says to simply click on the task and mark as done. And I'll say, this is not working. What do I need to do to fix? And so it's giving us the information here, right? Now, if we looked at our code, we can see what's supposed to happen is that when we click on the list item, it's supposed to mark to toggle it as completed. Completed in our li.completed is line through color light gray. So we should expect it to, when we click on it, do something. So let's check our console. Inspect element. We're clicking and we're clicking and we're clicking and we're clicking and nothing's happening. So let's try asking it again. So it's suggesting that I add a console log here. So it's actually giving me an option to do some debugging. So let's try that out. Let's add my console log to that function. So let's find my script. We're on that function. Let's just add a little console log here to that function. And now let's see what happens. So it's telling me that the item is being clicked, but what's not happening is it's not toggling the class. So now I can provide that information to ChatGPT. I added the console.log line. It shows me the function is triggering when I click the list item, but the CSS class does not toggle. And so it gives us this idea here that to ensure the .completed class is correctly defined in our CSS. That's the suggestion that it's giving you. So now if we look at it here, this shouldn't be an issue, but it may be with jQuery because we're using a more specific selector here of li.completed instead of just .completed. So let's try removing that li. So it's just .completed and giving that a try. So we see it still does not work. Right? So this is that thing that we were talking about earlier. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Right? Like if we're human beings and we're looking at this, we can look at our we can actually look at our HTML here for our to-do list. And look at our JavaScript here and kind of try to figure out what's happening. So once we kind of look at this, what we're seeing is there actually is an issue. Right? Because this is this is our hashtag to-do list, our to-do list in ID location. So that is when we look at our HTML, that's our unordered list. So let's try to debug this from a human perspective, right? And see what we should probably do instead. And we can do that by referencing the jQuery documentation like we were looking at last week. And so here's the jQuery documentation for a click event. And we can see that it is triggered a little bit different. Right? We have our target on click and then a function. But if we look at our JavaScript here, we see target on click li function. So I'm wondering if it maybe has something to do with the click handler for the item. So let's try changing this to li dot on click function and running that and just see what that. Still not working. I think I know why it's not working. I think it's I actually do believe this is an HTML reason that it's not working. Because I think one of the things that you have to have if you're going to do toggle class is that you have to have a class on your, you actually have to have a class, an empty class on your element when you create it. So I have to put like a class equals nothing. And so now when I look at that, we can actually watch it switch class. We can watch it switch from class equals nothing to class equals completed, but it's still not updating my style. Interesting. There may be something wrong. It actually looks like there is something wrong with how we have a style sheet. So let's say here that type equals, instead of doing, this is sort of the new school way, let's do it link. Let's do the link instead. Link href style type equals text slash css. Self close. Get rid of this. Spell the word type correctly. When we look at the jQuery here for our HTML, we can see what it did for the style sheet. That might help us out a little bit. It did link rel style sheet, href styles.css. So we just need to add that. We should add that rel equals style sheet in there. I was trying a new style of style sheet addition earlier with the style equals, which maybe not adopted into Opera yet. I was just kind of reading about that the other day, so I wanted to try to figure it out. So once we figure out that we're linking the style sheet wrong, right? Again, human thought in there. We realize that, okay, well, maybe this actually is working. We start to click it. Now that works. Wrap things up. Let's make that a high priority. Add that task, and we see it there. And if we try to refresh our page, we see that everything's still there after we refresh because it's all stored in local. So ChatGPT did a better job than we thought. We just did a poor job implementing. So as you are using AI for your projects in class, I want you to consider 3 things, or I want you to tell me 3 things if you used it. 1, I want you to tell me which LLM you used. Basically, make and model. So if you used ChatGPT 4.0, tell me that. If you used, say, a different one, tell me the one that you used. I want to know the prompt you used to generate the code. Just copy and paste it in. And I want to know what you did when you implement. Did it just go straight in with no changes? Did you have to change it a little bit? Did you have to manually do some things yourself? Just what did you do? What did you add to it? What did you have to change with it? So on and so forth. So these are the 3 things that I'm going to want to know as you are doing your project in this. And so with that, I'm done. Right? Like, that created something pretty cool that works pretty well. There are some features that I might want to add to it. Let me go ahead and push this to GitHub before I wrap up today. But while I'm pushing it and kind of going through that again, if anybody's here with me live, you can put your questions in the chat. But remember, when we're pushing to GitHub, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new repository. I'm going to name that repository. So this would be Web 140 FA jQuery 2 AI. We're going to create that repository. In our code, in VS Code, I'm going to start a new terminal. I'm going to make sure I'm in the root of the project. And I'm going to run my commands, right? Which are, and let me zoom in, git init, because we want to put git in it. We want to add all of our files, so git add period. We want to do a commit, which is going to be git commit -m and add our commit message. In this case, it will be initial commit. Remember that, like, good best practice for writing commits is to write them in present tense. And then everything else, we just follow our instructions from GitHub. So we would pick up from here, git branch -m main, copy that, paste that there. Git remote add origin, copy that, paste that there, and hit enter. And finally, git push -u origin main to finally push it to GitHub. And it goes. And once it's all done, I can refresh. There's my code. And remember, to get your live code, we'll go up here in our repo to settings. We'll go over here to pages. We will select our main branch from the branches, and we will save. And then after a few minutes of sitting here, we'll be able to refresh this page and get the link to the site live. It just does a quick deployment. So if you have any questions, if you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please send me an email or a Teams message and let me know. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.